Welcome to Momentous. I am Pastor Rebecca Great, the pastor mission developer for Momentous and the host for our weekly podcast. At Momentous, we believe that God is present with us in each and every single one of our moments. We believe that our stories are connected to God's story and to one another's stories. We believe that this connection and relationship changes our lives and our entire world. Before we begin, I invite you to take a deep breath in. Hold it while you count to 3, and then slowly release that breath. This week, we are focusing on the 5th verse of the hymn, O Come, Emmanuel. So in case you don't remember from last week's episode, here are the lyrics for this verse. O come, O Key of David, come, and open wide our heavenly home. Make safe the way that leads on high and close the path to misery. So to cover this particular topic in this particular verse, we are going to spend some time talking about what Lutheran Christians believe happens when we die. We are joined by Vicar Jaren Summers, who is currently serving at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Upper Arlington, which is one of the neighborhoods in the Metro Columbus area. And we are so excited that he has taken some time to join us today. So Vicar Summers, can you introduce yourself a little bit more to the Momentous community?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Glad to be on. Thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Jaren Summers, and I'm a vicar at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, which, for those of you who don't know, a vicar is a fancy name that we use to describe interns, those who are preparing to be a pastor and are interning at a church to prepare themselves for full-time ministry once they graduate from seminary. So I'm in my 4th year of seminary, my last year of seminary at the Trinity Lutheran Seminary at Capital University here in Columbus. And I've been in Columbus for 4 years as I've been doing my seminary training. I'm 25 years old. I came to the faith late in life, and just really happy to be on and share a little bit of what I've been working on lately.
Can you share a little bit more about what seminary, like what your path to seminary has looked like? Those of you who are joining the Momentous podcast and have been with us for a little while, you may remember the name Seven O'Riordan, who served with Momentous this past fall as a leadership and context student, which is also part of seminary education. And internship is different from LIC placements. And I was curious if you could share a little bit about where you are in the process and how that impacts where you are heading after internship.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, there are 2 tracks. One track is your synod track, and the other track is your seminary track. And you got to walk both tracks at the same time to get ordained. So one track would be called candidacy, and that's done by your synods. I'm originally from Indiana, so I'm with the IK Synod, Indiana Kentucky Synod, and so I do 3 interviews with them. And then at seminary, I'm working on earning my Master of Divinity, my MDiv, which is a 4-year degree program. And if all things work out, which they have been lately, I will complete both processes at the same time. So I will have completed my candidacy track and my seminary track so that I can be ordained, hopefully for myself, this upcoming fall 2024.
Which will be such great news for you and for the church. I cannot wait to hear about what comes in the future for you and for your ministry. It'll be great. Aaron, you mentioned that you've been working on some things. And those of you who are listening, you couldn't see, but I put some air quotes around that. What have you been working on? I think I've seen some writings that you've been publishing. What have those been about?
Yeah, so happy to talk about those. I have published two articles with Lutheran publications in the past couple months, one with Covalence magazine, the other one with Living Lutheran. And really, what I've been focusing on is a passion of mine, which is end of life care and talk about the afterlife, that eternal hope we have as Christians that we might hear a lot about, but I've been trying to dig through what the Bible actually has to say compared to what our culture has been working on over the past thousands of years, and also focus on what does that mean for us in our lives as Christians or as people who might want to learn more about the Christian faith.
Why are you so interested in those things?
Yeah, so really I've been interested in the afterlife for a long time because I grew up, I wasn't raised Lutheran or in a mainstream church. I grew up very evangelical, conservative fundamentalist, and heaven was the main goal, which in a way it was one extreme where you were so heavenly minded that you were no earthly good. And that was just very much part of my upbringing, worrying about heaven and hell and things like that. And then I come to seminary, and the exact opposite is true. No one talks about it. In fact, when you talk about heaven or hell, people kind of get bored and they kind of shut down. Like, do we really need to spend our time on this? And I have found that that's another extreme I want to avoid. I think that Christianity and Lutheranism and the Bible altogether have things on offer that avoid both extremes. That yes, we have an eternal hope and we might not know everything about it, but it gives us something to hold on to when we grieve and when we suffer loss in our lives.
For those of us who are joining this conversation, we may have an understanding about different views that different types of Christians hold about what death means and what comes after death. I know that whenever I've preached and taught, I proclaim the hope that we have through Christ's death and resurrection and ascension. The truth is, none of us really actually know what it looks like because we haven't been there before. So I'm wondering if you could spend a few more moments comparing and contrasting what you learned about these things growing up and then what you have already learned in seminary and then how that has strengthened your ministry with congregations and everything. Because those of us who are Lutheran and listening to the podcast, we may or may not have a good understanding of what we believe as Lutherans, much less what another denomination believes. And those of us who are part of another denomination may know what we believe, but not what Lutherans believe. So I was wondering if you could spend a little more time comparing and contrasting those, not to try to pit them against one another, but just to give some more background information.
Yeah, so I think that to grapple that, what I think would be best is if I talk about one, just a brief synopsis of what I have found compared to what I learned, and then maybe in a second part we can talk about its implications in the church, in the parish. I grew up thinking that when you die, you go to either heaven and hell. So your soul leaves your body's this sack of meat that you don't want anymore, and you're freed and you get to go to heaven and hell. And that was what I grew up with. And when I went to seminary, when I started digging into things on my own, I realized that things are more complicated than that. Um, you know, I grew up thinking that, when you go to heaven, you're going to the city in the sky with streets of gold and things like that, or hell's this burning, lava pit where you're tortured forever. But really, the Bible's a lot more complicated in this regard, and theology has rightly been very reserved about these topics. So generally, I like going to what the Apostle Paul had to say. St. Paul would say that being alive here on earth is actually really good. It's good to have life. It's good to be embodied. It's good to be in the flesh. When we die, we go to be with Christ, whether that's disembodied or with a new body, we don't really know. but it's known as this intermediate state where we are with Christ, waiting for the last day. So being in this life is good, dying and being with Christ is better. And then at the end of time, we will be resurrected with new bodies. So what happened to Jesus on Easter Sunday will one day happen to us as well. Now, these are different kinds of bodies. Paul calls them spiritual bodies, which is like an oxymoron. And really, the Bible grapples with this idea that we'll be embodied, but in a new way. Because we're not meant to just be wispy essences floating in the clouds. We're meant to be really embodied people in relationship with God and one another. So you're alive in this life. When you die, you go to be with Christ. And then at the end of time, we'll be resurrected when Jesus returns at the second coming. And as Paul says, being alive on this earth is good, departing and being with Christ is better, and the best of all is being resurrected at the end of time. And that's usually the stages that are set up. But of course, these things get really fuzzy when we try and account for time possibly being different in the afterlife than it is currently right now.
When I was surveying on my internship, so this is 2010 or 2011. I was on internship. I served in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, there is a college and seminary. It's now a university, but it's called Moravian University. And while I was there, I became friends with some of the seminary students because I could. Like, I was in seminary just on internship, so let's go be friends with friends at a different seminary. And they invited me to like a renowned lecture on campus. I can't remember the exact name of it. And the speaker was Rita Nakashima Brock. In her talk, she shared a lot of her research that focused on a book she wrote. The main title of it is called Saving Paradise. I think there's a subtitle after it, but that I can't recall off the top of my head. But in that book and in the talk, she lifted up all of these different ancient murals and mosaics, and how the earliest Christian church very much held that life on earth was a gift. This was where we were created to be. Creation is what we were called to be stewards of, and to care for one another and to live in community together. And in so much of early Christian art, that is what is at the forefront. Which, comparing to some different theologies that showed up later, that say things along the lines of what you had shared with what I hear you saying, how you grew up learning, was earth is this place to be endured, because the goal is to not be here. The goal is to be in heaven. And how Christian theology has shifted so much over the past 2,000 years. And not in all pockets of Christianity, but it was interesting to see that dichotomy through her talk and her work. And ever since 2010 or 2011, whenever that lecture was, that book has been on my to-be-read pile. And I just haven't had a chance to dive into it past that. I think it was an all-day lecture. So past that, I haven't dove into that too much. But I hear that kind of paralleling what you just shared about what you had learned growing up, and then how and where your theology and understanding of life and death and eternity, how that has shifted over the past several years. Do you find that you feel, or other people feel after you've shared this with them, that they feel more free or more connected with God after they've learned that maybe it's okay to enjoy things that are part of our embodied existence on earth?
Yeah, I think, it's been really amazing for me sharing this with people. because oftentimes they think that, we're here and then I want to free my soul and go to heaven. And really, what the Christian message is saying is no, actually, it's really good being embodied right now. And yes, it's difficult. It's not perfect yet. God says creation is good. It's not perfect, but one day it will be perfect. And so our ultimate designs are not to leave Earth so we can live our lives right now in pursuit of that. Knowing that, as Revelation says, there will be a new heaven and a new earth. As Paul says, a new creation. Whether that's literal or metaphorical, we can get into, but the general gist is that actually it's really good to be part of the created order. And what God's doing is not taking us out of the created order, but to perfect the created order we are actually in when we are resurrected. And Jesus's body is a hint to this. When he was raised on Easter Sunday, he was in a perfected body. And that's just a foreshadowing of what awaits all of us. Um, Going to heaven when we die is only part of the equation. It's not the full equation.
We get to know what the full equation is.
Yeah, we can know what the full equation is.
Yeah.
The full equation, we're here on Earth, and we have such an amazing opportunity in our lives to serve God and serve as mirrors reflecting the divine in our own lives and serving God. And if that was it, I think that'd be good enough, just because I think it's amazing to be able to serve God in this life and serve our neighbors. But God says that isn't it, that a relationship with God is an eternal relationship. And so when we die, we, as Paul says, depart to go be with the Lord. We depart to be with Christ. We don't really know what that looks like. Revelation talks about the saints being under the altar, crying out, "How long, O Lord?" We Jesus talks about paradise, and really the Bible only says that we will be with Christ. Not many more details after that. And I mean, I don't think I'd want any more details, because anything that'd be communicated, I could understand, and anything I can understand, I'd probably get bored with after a while. So there's a mystery element that, yeah, it's going to be really amazing, and we can't know about it because our minds are so limited right now. So we'll be with Christ in heaven when we die, and then eventually Jesus will return. And we don't know what that'll look like, but somehow Jesus will come back to earth, and this new creation will be ushered in with a new heaven and a new earth with resurrected bodies. And so, what I like to tell my parishioners, my congregation members, that, when our loved ones die, it's only a short while until we get to enjoy those hugs once more. And it's only a short while until we're able to encounter the love that is shared between two embodied individuals. The big picture is not about us being wispy essences, but instead to be fully ourselves. And that's all God has ever desired, is for us to be fully ourselves in loving relationship with God and with one another.
I cannot wait for the day. And this isn't me trying to escape anything, right? I cannot wait for the day where relationships are perfect or are perfected, whatever the appropriate verb tense is there. Because that's not something that anyone has ever experienced. What does it mean to live lives that have been and are appropriately supportive and caring and living for the betterment of everyone, and not only what my wants are? I think that'll be, I don't think we can wrap our heads around that, because so many of our relationships are imperfect right now. I don't know. I get chills thinking about it, because, oh my gosh, it will be so different, right? Tell me a little bit more about how you've been able to share some of this. I know not all of your brilliance can be contained in a few articles, but how did you get connected to these different places where you've been able to write about some of these things? And Can you tell a little bit more about what you've included in the writing so far and what might be coming up next?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to. I reached out with Covalence, really focuses on the dialogue between Lutheran theology and science. And I've always wanted to write about what science can tell us about the afterlife because I think science offers us more than than we're prepared to realize. For example, there are professors and doctors out there like Sam Parnia and others who have done work on near-death experiences, which are super fascinating in and of themselves. And it's not so much a really interesting part for me isn't so much people having visions, but what we call veridical experiences, where individuals float above their bodies. They're dead on the operating table. They float above their bodies, and then they can actually accurately report things that have happened in the next room over or with family members in the grieving room. And they've been able to confirm these reports, which kind of says that maybe the mind is separated from the body. And so that's always interested me. And so I reached out to Covalence and said, can I explore this a little? And I spent a lot of time in that article focusing on what the academic work actually has to say from reputable scholars and what that means in conversation with the Bible. And then worked with Living Lutheran and said, hey, I wrote this really dense academic work, but I want it to be accessible to people who may not have a background in science or academia. And so that's where the Living Lutheran article came from, because I think I think it's most important for things to be shared with everybody and not just a small academic elite. So that's what Living Lutheran did. And now I'm working, hopefully I'll be published with BioLogos sometime in the future. I'm working with them right now to publish a similar article with BioLogos going more into layman or non-academic perspective on the same topic.
In my seminary education, I served as a chaplain for my summer unit, and then I also elected to spend a year as a chaplain resident at a different hospital system. And the way the floor assignments went in that summer unit, and for the first half of my residency, I was the chaplain that related to the intensive care units and to the trauma bay, which are the areas in a hospital that sees some of the most critical cases, like emergently critical cases. And I remember my first or second patient I had on my summer unit. He had been involved in, I won't share too many details because privacy laws, but he had been involved in an accident, came in as a trauma, and then was admitted to one of the ICUs and was just there for like the entire summer long. And for some reason, it felt like I was hooked to like go and make sure that I made contact in some way, shape, or form with him all summer long. And he was not conscious. He was actively sedated, so that way machines could do the breathing for him and he could be on dialysis and receive all the treatments he needed so his body could heal. I now know that like hook feeling was the spirit kind of nudging chaplain, go see this patient. And in a wild full circle kind of moment, in my last week of the internship, woke up. We were removing the sedation so that way they could see if he was going to be able to breathe on his own after a few months. And he woke up, and I got to be there part of that with his family. And his parents had been faithfully visiting him every day, so I got to know them a little bit. And they said his name. This is a chaplain. He's like, I know. I saw her come in every single day. But he didn't because he was sedated, but he could, like, he remembered the day I read the Yankee scores to him because his parents told me he loved the Yankees. And so I was like, I don't like the Yankees, I will read these to you because this is important. This is right. This is how you can stay up on baseball. And so I know, like, I've witnessed that, and so I think it's really neat that the fact that that happens is being studied by those of us who have some expertise in theology, as well as those who have some expertise in how we understand currently how the human body works and all of the different scientific processes that go into how our body works and what consciousness is and what it isn't, and how there's still, I would assume, a lot to learn.
There is. We're at the tip of the iceberg, and the truth is, I don't know if we'll ever get answers. Some doctors have put out biological explanations, like maybe they were low on oxygen or anything like that, but all the mainstream scholars in the field will actually say that those are all disproven. We don't know how this happens, how someone can have these experiences outside of their body. Um, you might use words like soul or spirit or consciousness. We don't know how, but we can confirm some of these cases. And what I really appreciate, I love that you shared that story. Thank you. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this work, because in the church, even among secular folks, I share these stories. And then lo and behold, other people have had these experiences too, or a family member has had these experiences. My own family has stories of heavenly visitations of, when my grandfather passed, he came to my grandmother in a dream, and some other things happened. We hear these stories all the time, and I'm afraid our culture is afraid to talk about them, and I really think pastors need to be equipped to have these conversations because they are a lot more prevalent than we are cognizant of.
One of the things, and I don't use it in every funeral sermon, but I, I do quite a bit. And I know I have like a predisposition to use fancy church words and then define them because they said they have some meaning. But in a lot of funeral sermons, especially when it's a funeral where we are celebrating communion, I will talk about how during communion, at least in the Lutheran Church, we understand that Christ is truly present in the bread, in the wine, also in the grape juice, if we're also using grape juice, that Christ is truly present because Christ has promised that Christ is present. And we also believe that during that meal, everybody who is gathering for the meal that we can actually see with our eyeballs, there's something called the church militant. And then whenever we come forward to receive the bread and receive the wine, we're also joined right there with the church triumphant, with all of those who have died in the faith and have already gone on. And in that meal, like, yes, we are united in Christ, but we're united because of its death and resurrection. And then you get to tie baptism in and how we are all united into this family of faith, into this family of God. And this isn't trying, I'm not trying to communicate that this, like, I'm an amazing pastor. Like, it's just me telling people what Lutherans believe before we get to do this really weird thing that's coming up after the sermon. And I think whenever, like, I've been at bedsides or heard that other people were at people's bedsides when they're dying, they start seeing their grandparents or their parents or other family members, even other close friends that have already died. And they start seeing them at their bedside. To me, that is a continuation of that what happens in communion, where we are unified with the saints who have gone on before us. And I think that's a really neat intersection. And I know that that's Christian theology. It may not line up with theologies of other faiths. It might line up with some theology of other faiths. But I think that's a really neat intersection, at least for this niche of study about consciousness and science and how there seems to be some truth present in this. But it's also something like you can't replicate. It's not like a true science experiment where I can run this experiment every time and I will get something approximating the same result. Because not everyone who's dying has that experience. But a lot do. And I've seen where family members who are still living get a little uneasy because no, they don't see those people. They're not there. It's like, well, we don't. They do. And what if that is how a community that exists, Christian community that exists throughout the ages, unifies at this incredibly holy moment of how comforting to know that in this life and in the next, we don't leave and enter alone.
It really captures the imagination, and I think you said it best in the way that I always sum it up with parishioners is that no matter what, God is present in this life and the next. We are with God in this life, and when we depart, no matter what it looks like, we will be with God. And we will, just as we worship with the saints in this life, we will be worshiping with the saints in the next life. And that just gives me chills. The idea that there's this connection between the barrier between this world and the next is a lot thinner than I think many of us imagine. Celtic spirituality, the spirituality of the British Isles, often talks about thin places, these places where the heavenly and the earthly come together. And I love that you shared some of those bedside stories. I've had some from when I worked in chaplaincy and from others in chaplaincy, and they're a lot more common than people realize. That there's something more going on, and the Christian faith has named it throughout history, and we can't prove it necessarily, but there's a lot of signs pointing in that direction.
My first several calls when I was a chaplain where I was called, there's a patient who is approaching death, chaplain, please come. I remember I was so anxious. I was very young as a chaplain intern, early 20s, I think. Yeah, because I was right out of undergrad. I was so anxious. And I remembered talking with my supervisor afterwards. And he was like, he looked at me and he said something along the lines of, when you're in those holy spaces and you feel uncomfortable, that's when you lean into pray. And that has been some of the best advice that any supervisor or any colleague has given me, because of how often pastors are invited into those holy places of major transition.
It's truly a privilege that we have working in ministry to accompany people in some of the most formative moments of their lives, from birth to baptism to death, marriage, everything in between. It's such a privilege we have, and it's one of my favorite parts about ministry. It's also one of the hardest parts of ministry, and I don't think people realize just how much pastors spend in these moments, and knowing that what helps me is knowing I'm not alone in those moments, that God's holding my hand just as God is holding the patient's hand, and knowing that Christ has gone through death so that we can go through death too.
Aaron, thank you so much for finding time this afternoon to join us and give us kind of a brief introduction to this way of thinking about death and the afterlife and eternity, and how we approach it through a Lutheran lens. This can be a big and heavy topic because of how averse our culture is to staying present with or even talking about the reality of death. So give thanks for your ministry in exploring this topic and writing. I know you mentioned that you have currently published 2 different articles. I believe I have links to those courtesy of you sharing them on your social media. So, those of you who are listening, if you'd like to read those articles, I will make sure to include those in the show notes. I was curious if you had any other additional resources that you would recommend for someone who would want to do some kind of independent learning about this that would be appropriate for someone that has maybe some theological training, or maybe even someone who doesn't have theological training but is just curious about this.
Yeah, I'd love to. I have two books that I think could be helpful. One is Christian theological work by the scholar N.T. Wright, called Surprised by Hope. Really excellent account of the Christian hope that covers it from beginning to end. Really easy book to read too, very accessible. I recommend that. For someone interested in more of the science behind afterlife, what we're looking at near-death experiences and things like that. A book that I highly recommend above all other books is the book After. That's the title, After, by Dr. Bruce Grayson. Works with the University of Virginia, and he's been studying these things for decades now. And his book After came out a couple years ago, and it just is so up to date with the science behind these things that I really, he isn't even a Christian, but he writes about how this points to an afterlife hope, and I just think that it would be very, very worth your time to check it out.
Those sound amazing. Friends, I will make sure to also link to those different books on the show notes that will be on our website, just to make sure to make it as easy as possible for you to find those resources. Jaren, thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing more about what God is up to as you finish internship, as you head into First Call, and as you move into your ministries.
Thank you. God bless.
Next week, we are going to be focusing on verse 6 and God through us. I'm going to read the text of that verse so you can ponder these words over the next week. O come, O dayspring, come and cheer. O Son of Justice, now draw near. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadow put to flight. Thank you for joining us for our weekly Moment to Us. We are looking forward to growing with each of you and are so grateful that you are already a part of the Momentous community. I want to say thank you to our mission partners, the Southern Ohio Synod and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Their financial contributions and their constant prayers have been instrumental in ensuring that this ministry continues to grow. This week, I also want to thank Advent Lutheran Church in Columbus, Ohio, for inviting me to preach this morning, January 21st, 2024. They are gathering for worship in person at 8:30 and at 11 a.m., and they will be live streaming their 11 a.m. worship service on their YouTube channel, which I have linked in the transcript for this episode on our website. Inviting me to supply preach or lead an education event or to lead a retreat or to just be present with you all for worship and then to answer some questions before or after are all different ways that congregations and ministries can partner with us. Last Sunday on January 14th, we gathered at Java Central for Brewed Theology, even in the snow, even in the below freezing temperatures. We had a small gathering and we talked about how we can care for and serve our neighbors during the winter, what the season of Epiphany means for how we share our faith while respecting those of other faiths, and how we can pray for one another until our next gathering for Bedtime BS on Sunday, January 28th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. For that Bible study, we are going to be starting at the very beginning of the Gospel according to Mark. This is the gospel that many congregations will be focusing on for the entire church year, so we're going to join them in studying the gospel this year. This gathering will meet for about an hour before we head off to whatever else our Sunday nights need from us before a Monday morning shows up. So if you are definitely planning to attend or you're just thinking about attending, I would love for you to RSVP so you can receive the Zoom link via email ahead of time. There is a link to the RSVP in the transcript for this episode on our website, and it will also be shared on our social media pages later this week, in the posts themselves, and then in our stories on Facebook and Instagram. Anyone is able to attend these gatherings, no matter how often you have attended a Christian church or how long it has been since you last attended. We can't wait to see you on Zoom. If you would like to support the ministry of MomenToUs, attending our in-person events and inviting others to join you is one way you can do that. Engaging with us online on our social media platforms is a whole other way that you can do that. And if you're able to give financially, you can visit our website and find more information about how to donate electronically or how to address physical checks to be mailed to our synod's secure P.O. box. Each one-time or recurring gift combines together to ensure that this ministry continues to grow. Until our next podcast, remember to breathe deeply and that God is present with you every single moment.